For years, I learned how to become invisible. At family dinners, my daughter-in-law would smile without warmth, her eyes sliding past me as if I were part of the furniture. When guests came over, she introduced everyone with pride, her friends, her parents, her achievements, then gestured vaguely in my direction. Awe him. I was spoken to slowly, corrected publicly, and dismissed with polite cruelty. If I tried to give advice, she laughed. If I stayed silent, she complained I had nothing to contribute. Either way, I lost. I told myself it didn't matter. I was old. I had already lived my life. But humiliation has a way of sinking into your bones. It sits there quietly, reminding you of every dream you postponed, every chance you let slip because you thought patience was the same as wisdom. My son noticed more than he admitted. Sometimes, when she wasn't looking, he would meet my eyes with something like apology. But apologies don't change power. And in that house, I had none. The day everything shifted was ordinary. She handed me a list, errands she needed done, things she didn't have time for. When I finished, she glanced at the bags and said, "See, at least you're useful for something." She didn't mean it as a joke. She meant it as truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anger, but from clarity. I realized something simple and terrifying: no one was coming to save me. Respect wasn't going to appear one day because I endured enough. Love wasn't going to grow out of silence. If my fate was going to change, it would be because I changed it quietly, completely, and without asking permission. I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I stopped reacting. And while they mistook my calm for surrender, I started rebuilding myself piece by piece. I sold a small plot of land I had inherited decades ago, one no one remembered existed. I reached out to an old friend who ran a modest business and invested carefully. I took online courses at night, learning skills I never thought I'd need at my age. I woke up early, worked late, and told no one. Not because I was ashamed, but because privacy is power when people underestimate you. At home, nothing changed, at least not on the surface. She still corrected me in front of guests. She still spoke over me. She still treated me like a burden she tolerated because society expected it. And I let her. Every insult slid off me because I was no longer standing where she thought I was. 3 months passed. One evening, I came home later than usual. She looked annoyed. "Where were you?" she asked sharply. "Out," I replied. She rolled her eyes. "Next time, let someone know. This isn't a hotel." I smiled to myself. She had no idea how close she was to the truth. The change became impossible to ignore after that. New clothes, a new phone, confidence that couldn't be faked. I started declining errands politely. I spent weekends away. People called me, asked for my opinion, sought my help. My son noticed first. He asked questions I answered vaguely. His wife noticed too, but instead of curiosity, she showed irritation. Power shifting always looks like disrespect to those who think they own it. The final moment came when I told them I was moving out. She laughed. Actually laughed. With what money? I placed the papers on the table: property documents, business contracts, bank statements. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I let silence do the work. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. I moved into a place that felt like mine, light-filled, quiet, earned. I woke up each day without bracing myself for humiliation. I worked, I rested, I breathed. People treated me differently, not because I demanded it, but because I finally believed I deserved it. Then, 3 months later, they came. Not together at first. My son called, his voice unsure. He said they missed me, that the house felt empty, that things weren't the same. I listened kindly and said nothing. A week later, they showed up at my door. She stood there, eyes red, pride cracked, but not entirely gone. When she spoke, her voice shook. She said mistakes were made, that family should stay together, that I should come back. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt no anger, just distance. "I was always here," I said calmly. "You just never saw me," she cried then, begged, promised things would change, and maybe they would have. But I had already changed my fate, quietly, completely, without asking. I wished them well. I closed the door gently. Some people think revenge is about destruction. It isn't. It's about becoming so whole, so unrecognizable to the version they belittled, that their regret arrives too late to matter. For years, I learned how to become invisible. At family dinners, my daughter-in-law would smile without warmth, her eyes sliding past me as if I were part of the furniture. When guests came over, she introduced everyone with pride, her friends, her parents, her achievements, then gestured vaguely in my direction. "Oh him. I was spoken to slowly, corrected publicly, and dismissed with polite cruelty. If I tried to give advice, she laughed. If I stayed silent, she complained I had nothing to contribute. Either way, I lost. I told myself it didn't matter. I was old. I had already lived my life. But humiliation has a way of sinking into your bones. It sits there quietly, reminding you of every dream you postponed, every chance you let slip, because you thought patience was the same as wisdom. My son noticed more than he admitted. Sometimes, when she wasn't looking, he would meet my eyes with something like apology. But apologies don't change power, and in that house I had none. The day everything shifted was ordinary. She handed me a list, errands she needed done, things she didn't have time for. When I finished, she glanced at the bags and said, "See, at least you're useful for something." She didn't mean it as a joke. She meant it as truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anger, but from clarity. I realized something simple and terrifying. No one was coming to save me. Respect wasn't going to appear one day because I endured enough. Love wasn't going to grow out of silence. If my fate was going to change, it would be because I changed it quietly, completely, and without asking permission. I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I stopped reacting. And while they mistook my calm for surrender, I started rebuilding myself piece by piece. I sold a small plot of land I had inherited decades ago, one no one remembered existed. I reached out to an old friend who ran a modest business and invested carefully. I took online courses at night, learning skills I never thought I'd need at my age. I woke up early, worked late, and told no one. Not because I was ashamed, but because privacy is power when people underestimate you. At home, nothing changed, at least not on the surface. She still corrected me in front of guests. She still spoke over me. She still treated me like a burden she tolerated because society expected it. And I let her. Every insult slid off me, because I was no longer standing where she thought I was. 3 months passed. One evening, I came home later than usual. She looked annoyed. "Where were you?" she asked sharply. "Oh," I replied. She rolled her eyes. "Next time, let someone know. This isn't a hotel." I smiled to myself. She had no idea how close she was to the truth. The change became impossible to ignore after that. New clothes. A new phone. Confidence that couldn't be faked. I started declining errands politely. I spent weekends away. People called me, asked for my opinion, sought my help. My son noticed first. He asked questions I answered vaguely. His wife noticed too, but instead of curiosity, she showed irritation. Power shifting always looks like disrespect to those who think they own it. The final moment came when I told them I was moving out. She laughed. Actually laughed. With what money? I placed the papers on the table, property documents, business contracts, bank statements. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I let silence do the work. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say. I moved into a place that felt like mine. Light-filled, quiet. Earned. I woke up each day without bracing myself for humiliation. I worked, I rested, I breathed. People treated me differently, not because I demanded it, but because I finally believed I deserved it. Then, 3 months later, they came. Not together at first. My son called, his voice unsure. He said they missed me, that the house felt empty, that things weren't the same. I listened kindly and said nothing. A week later, they showed up at my door. She stood there, eyes red, pride cracked, but not entirely gone. When she spoke, her voice shook. She said mistakes were made, that family should stay together, that I should come back. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt no anger. Just distance. "I was always here," I said calmly. "You just never saw me," she cried then. Begged. Promised things would change, and maybe they would have. But I had already changed my fate. Quietly. Completely. Without asking. I wished them well. I closed the door gently. Some people think revenge is about destruction. It isn't. It's about becoming so whole, so unrecognizable to the version they belittled, that their regret arrives too late to matter. For years, the humiliation didn't arrive loudly. It came in small, almost polite pieces, which somehow made it worse. A look that dismissed me before I finished a sentence. A laugh that lingered a second too long after something I said. A correction delivered in front of others, wrapped in a smile so sweet no one else noticed the poison underneath. My daughter-in-law never shouted at me. She never openly insulted me. She didn't have to. She mastered the art of making me feel small while appearing perfectly reasonable to everyone watching. At first, I tried harder. I spoke less, thinking silence might earn respect. When that didn't work, I spoke more carefully, measuring every word so I wouldn't give her another excuse to mock me. I offered help before it was asked for, hoping usefulness would buy dignity. Instead, it became an expectation. My presence turned into a convenience, my opinions into inconveniences. Slowly, I learned that no version of me seemed good enough, not the quiet one, not the helpful one, not the patient one. What hurt most was not what she did, but how normal it became. Family gatherings turned into performances where I played the role of the outdated extra. When guests were around, she would talk about modern thinking, ambition, success, words she never connected to me. If I tried to join the conversation, she'd nod politely and redirect it elsewhere, as if I had spoken in the wrong language. People followed her lead. They always do. Respect is contagious, and so is disrespect. Inside, something began to crack. I stopped recognizing the man I used to be, the one who had once carried responsibility, made decisions, and built something with his own hands. That man still existed somewhere, but he had been buried under years of quiet tolerance. I told myself stories to survive. I said this was sacrifice. That enduring disrespect was the price of peace. That patience was a virtue, even when it hurt. But deep down I knew the truth. I wasn't being patient. I was being erased. There were nights I lay awake, replaying conversations in my head, thinking of things I should have said, but didn't. Not because I lacked the words, but because I lacked the courage to disturb the fragile balance of the house. I feared being labeled difficult, dramatic, ungrateful. I feared losing the little place I still had. So I swallowed everything, my pride, my anger, my sadness, and convinced myself that swallowing pain was the same as being strong. Yet pain doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It changes shape. It settles into your posture, your voice, your expectations of yourself. I began to expect less, not just from others, but from life. I stopped dreaming. I stopped imagining a future where I mattered. I told myself my best days were behind me, that invisibility was natural with age, that this was simply how the world worked. But even in that brokenness, something stubborn survived. A quiet refusal to fully disappear. Every insult hurt, yes, but it also left behind a small question I couldn't silence. Is this really all I am now? Each time she looked down on me, something inside me whispered that I was still more than what she saw. That whisper was faint, almost embarrassed, but it never died. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a fight or a final insult. It was a moment of realization, standing in my own home, feeling like a guest in my own life. I saw myself through her eyes and felt a deep, aching shame, not because I believed her judgment, but because I had allowed it to shape me. That shame burned hotter than anger, and beneath it, something else began to rise, resolve. I understood then that humiliation had taken many things from me, confidence, voice, comfort. But it hadn't taken my ability to choose. It hadn't taken my capacity to change. The years of being looked down on had wounded me deeply, but they had also sharpened my awareness. I knew exactly what it felt like to be powerless. And once you truly understand that feeling, you also understand what you never want to be again. So I endured those final days differently. Still quiet, still polite, but no longer broken inside. Each dismissive comment became a reminder, not of my worthlessness, but of why I needed to reclaim myself. The humiliation had carved scars into me, but scars are proof that something healed, not just that it hurt. That was the truth no one saw. While they believed I was shrinking, my will was slowly, painfully, learning how to stand again. The moment that changed everything didn't arrive with thunder or raised voices. It came disguised as something ordinary, almost forgettable, which is why it cut so deeply. That day I had done what I always did, quietly moved through the house, anticipating needs before they were spoken, trying to reduce my presence to something useful rather than burdensome. When she handed me a list of errands, there was no request in her tone, only expectation. I took the paper without comment, went out, and returned hours later with everything done exactly as written. She barely looked at the bags. Her eyes scanned them like a checklist, not an effort. Then she smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but carelessly, and said, "At least you're good for this much." The words themselves were simple. She had said far worse before. But something about the ease with which they came out of her mouth, the certainty behind them, made time slow down. In that second, I realized she wasn't trying to hurt me. She was stating what she believed to be a fact. That was the moment the illusion shattered. I had always told myself that if I just endured long enough, respect would eventually appear. But standing there, holding those bags, I understood the truth with painful clarity. She didn't see me as someone who had fallen from dignity. She saw me as someone who never had it to begin with. I didn't respond. I nodded, put the items away, and went to my room. But my body reacted before my mind could catch up. My hands trembled. My chest felt tight, as if something heavy had settled there and refused to move. For the first time in years, I didn't feel sad or angry. I felt awake. Wide awake, as if a fog I had lived in for years had suddenly lifted, leaving me exposed but alert. That night, sleep refused to come. I replayed the moment again and again, not to torture myself, but because it felt like a message I was finally ready to hear. I saw myself from the outside, a man who had slowly trained everyone around him on how little he expected. I had mistaken endurance for dignity, silence for wisdom, surrender for peace, and the world had responded accordingly. What terrified me most was not how she treated me, but how easily I had accepted it. I had adjusted my behavior, my tone, even my dreams to fit into a version of life where I took up as little space as possible. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped believing I was allowed to want more. That realization hurt more than any insult she had ever thrown my way. I sat there in the dark and asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If nothing changes, is this how I want to disappear? The answer came quickly, and it was absolute. No, I didn't want to be remembered as the man who endured everything quietly and became nothing. I didn't want my story to end as a footnote in someone else's life. That was when another truth emerged, sharp and undeniable. No one in that house had any reason to change. The arrangement worked perfectly for them. They had comfort, control, and convenience. I had learned to provide without expecting anything back. Why would they ever offer respect when I had trained them not to? For the first time, I stopped asking what they owed me and started asking what I owed myself. The answer felt heavy but freeing. I owed myself effort. I owed myself dignity. I owed myself a future that didn't depend on being tolerated. The decision wasn't loud. There was no vow spoken out loud, no dramatic promise made to the mirror. It was quieter than that, but far more serious. I decided that night that I would stop waiting. I would stop hoping for permission. I would stop believing that my time had passed just because someone else had decided it. What surprised me was how calm I felt once the decision was made. The anger I thought would come never did. Instead, there was focus. A narrowing of attention, as if my life had suddenly been reduced to one clear task: rebuild myself, no matter how long it took, no matter how invisible the process had to be. The next morning, nothing looked different. I still woke up in the same room. I still heard the same voices. She still spoke to me in the same tone. But inside, the balance had shifted. Her words no longer defined me, they motivated me. Each dismissive glance became fuel. Each careless command reminded me why I had started. That single sentence, so casually spoken, became the line between the life I had accepted and the life I chose to reclaim. It didn't make me louder. It made me determined. And in that determination, something powerful was born: the understanding that the moment you stop expecting others to change, you finally become free to change yourself. What no one understood was that my silence had changed its purpose. Before, it came from fear of conflict, from exhaustion, from the belief that keeping peace was more important than keeping myself. Now it came from strategy. I had learned something crucial the night I decided to rebuild my life. Growth doesn't need witnesses. In fact, it thrives best without them. I began with what little I had left: time, discipline, and the advantage of being underestimated. When people think you are finished, they stop watching. That invisibility became my shield. While the house slept, I stayed awake. While others wasted hours scrolling, complaining, or chasing approval, I studied. I learned skills I had once believed were meant for younger men. I struggled at first, embarrassed by how slow I was, how often I had to repeat lessons. But every small improvement felt like reclaiming a stolen piece of myself. I took stock of my past, not with regret, but with precision. I remembered old connections I had let fade, talents I had abandoned because life demanded practicality. I reached out carefully, without announcing my intentions. A conversation here, a question there. Opportunities don't always arrive with excitement. Sometimes they appear disguised as effort. I accepted that rebuilding would be boring, tiring, and lonely. That didn't stop me. If anything, it strengthened my resolve. Money was tight, so I learned to be smarter rather than desperate. I sold something small that no one valued anymore. I invested cautiously, not chasing miracles but stability. Every rupee I earned felt heavier than money I had once made easily, because this time it carried meaning. It represented choice, independence, proof that I was still capable of building something from nothing. At home, I changed nothing outwardly. That was the most important part. I didn't announce my plans or hint at transformation. I still listened more than I spoke. I still moved quietly. And because nothing about my behavior signaled danger, they never questioned it. She continued to look down on me, confident that I was exactly where she believed I belonged. That confidence blinded her. But internally, I was changing faster than I ever had in my youth. Each day, my back straightened a little more. My voice steadied. My thoughts became sharper. I stopped replaying old insults and started planning future steps. I stopped wondering how they saw me and started focusing on how I saw myself. That shift alone was worth everything. There were moments of doubt, nights when fatigue whispered that it was too late, that effort at this stage was pointless. On those nights, I reminded myself that dignity has no expiration date, that the pain of trying and failing would still hurt less than the pain of never trying at all. I had already lived the cost of doing nothing. I wasn't willing to pay it again. Slowly, the results began to appear, not dramatically, but steadily. A project completed, a payment received, a compliment from someone who valued my work without knowing my story. Those moments healed parts of me I hadn't realized were broken. They reminded me that respect feels different when it's earned privately, without performance. The most powerful change wasn't financial. It was psychological. I stopped flinching. I stopped apologizing for existing. When she spoke dismissively, it no longer entered me. Her words bounced off a version of me she didn't recognize, because it wasn't built for her approval. I had become rooted somewhere deeper. I noticed how differently the world responds to someone who carries quiet confidence. Strangers treated me with ease. Conversations felt balanced again. People listened when I spoke, not because I demanded attention, but because I believed I deserved it. Confidence, I learned, doesn't announce itself. It settles into you and lets others adjust. All the while, I said nothing. No arguments, no explanations, no need to prove anything. The rebuild was mine alone, and that privacy made it powerful. There was no interference, no doubt planted by outside voices, no pressure to perform success before it was real. By the time the change became visible, it was already irreversible. What had started as small, deliberate steps had grown into a foundation strong enough to stand on its own. And the greatest victory was this: I no longer needed anyone to acknowledge my transformation for it to be real. I had rebuilt my future quietly, patiently, and completely, while they were still convinced I was standing still. The strange thing about changing from the inside is that it confuses people who only understand noise. I became quieter than ever, but this time my silence wasn't empty. It was full of intention, control, and a calm that didn't need validation. From the outside, nothing about me looked threatening. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct disrespect. And because of that, my daughter-in-law assumed she had finally broken me completely. She mistook restraint for defeat. When she spoke sharply, I responded evenly. When she dismissed my words, I let them fall. When she made decisions without consulting me, I nodded and stepped aside. To her, this was confirmation. She grew bolder, more careless. People always do when they believe they hold all the power. She spoke to me the way one speaks to something permanent and harmless, like a wall that will never move no matter how hard you lean against it. What she didn't see was that I had stopped reacting because I no longer needed to. Reaction had always been her fuel. My frustration, my hurt, my explanations, those were signs that her behavior mattered to me. And once it stopped mattering, once my sense of self stopped depending on her approval, there was nothing left for her to control. Inside, I was solidifying. My days had structure now. My mind had direction. I was no longer drifting through time, absorbing whatever treatment came my way. I was building momentum quietly, and momentum doesn't announce itself until it's impossible to stop. I noticed how easily I could sit through discomfort without shrinking, how insults no longer echoed in my head hours later, how calm had replaced the old knot of tension in my chest. She noticed the calm too, but she interpreted it incorrectly. To her, calm meant submission. She began assigning more tasks, more expectations, more invisible labor. She spoke over me more confidently, corrected me more publicly. There was a subtle cruelty in how relaxed she was about it, as if my silence had confirmed I would never push back. And I let her believe that because every underestimation gave me more room to grow. Meanwhile, my independence was taking shape. Small signs appeared, subtle changes in the way I dressed, the way I moved, the way I carried myself. I stopped rushing to comply. I began choosing when to be available. I said later, instead of a yes. I said no problem, without actually taking responsibility. These were small boundaries, almost invisible, but they were mine. The more centered I became, the more unsettled she grew. Power shifts are rarely loud at first. They show up as discomfort. She started watching me more closely, asking questions she had never bothered to ask before. Where are you going? Who called you? Why are you so busy? There was irritation in her voice now, edged with something else, uncertainty. She could feel the ground changing beneath her, even if she didn't understand how. Still, she clung to her assumptions. She believed that because I wasn't asserting myself verbally, I wasn't asserting myself at all. She believed strength had to look aggressive to be real. She believed silence was emptiness, and that belief blinded her. What she couldn't see was that my calm had become a shield. I no longer leaked information. I no longer explained my intentions. I no longer sought emotional reactions from anyone in the house. I conserved my energy carefully, spending it only where it produced results. The absence of drama wasn't weakness, it was discipline. Others began to notice the change before she did. My son looked at me differently. Conversations with me slowed down. He listened more. Strangers treated me with a kind of quiet respect, the kind that comes when someone is fully comfortable in their own skin. Confidence doesn't need volume. It has weight. And weight changes how people respond to you. When she finally sensed that something was off, it was already too late. Her comments stopped landing. Her authority no longer shaped my behavior. I had stepped out of the emotional space where she held power, and she had no tools to reach me there. That frightened her. People who rely on control fear nothing more than indifference. The calm she once enjoyed as proof of dominance became the calm that unsettled her. She tested it, pushed at it, tried to provoke a reaction, but there was nothing to grab onto. I wasn't cold. I wasn't hostile. I was simply unmoved. And nothing threatens a controlling person more than someone who cannot be shaken. By the time she realized my silence was not surrender but strength, my life had already expanded beyond her influence. I didn't need to confront her to win. I didn't need to raise my voice to reclaim dignity. I had outgrown the version of myself she thought she controlled. She believed my quiet meant I was still beneath her. In reality, I had risen so steadily, so calmly, that she never noticed until she was the one looking up. Expend 5 key point in 800 words without any haranguing. The day the truth finally surfaced didn't feel triumphant the way people imagine revenge should. There was no dramatic reveal, no raised voice, no moment where I listed everything I had endured. It unfolded quietly, almost gently, which made it far more powerful. By the time my success became visible, it was already a fact, solid, undeniable, and completely beyond anyone's control. It started with small disruptions to their expectations. I declined an errand without explanation. I missed a family gathering because I was busy. I answered phone calls with calm confidence instead of hesitation. These changes confused them, especially her. She had built a clear image of who I was in her mind: predictable, available, dependent. When that image began to crack, she reacted with irritation rather than understanding. She assumed I was being difficult on purpose, that I was acting out of resentment. She couldn't imagine a version of me that no longer needed her approval. Then came the signs she couldn't ignore. A new phone rang often, and the calls weren't casual. They were respectful, professional. People addressed me with seriousness, asked for my opinion, waited for my response. When I dressed better, she mocked it at first, assuming it was an attempt to impress. When I stopped responding to the mockery, her laughter faded. Confidence that doesn't ask for permission unsettles people who rely on superiority to feel secure. My son noticed before she did. He asked careful questions, ones filled with curiosity rather than judgment. I answered simply, without pride or secrecy. I could see the shift in his eyes, the realization that the man he had slowly learned to overlook was still very much alive. That look alone healed something in me. It reminded me that becoming strong again wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about reclaiming myself in the eyes of those who mattered. The moment everything changed was unplanned. A discussion about finances came up, casual and careless on their part. She spoke confidently about limits, about what could and couldn't be afforded, assuming I was still outside those decisions. When I calmly corrected a detail, just one, she snapped back, asking how I would know. That was when I placed the documents on the table. I didn't slide them dramatically. I didn't explain each page. I simply placed them there and waited. The room fell silent in a way I had never experienced before. Her eyes scanned the papers, then scanned them again, slower this time. Numbers don't lie, and success doesn't need decoration. In that silence, years of judgment collapsed under the weight of reality. Her face changed first, confusion giving way to disbelief. Disbelief hardening into something like fear. Not fear of me, but fear of being wrong. People who build their confidence on looking down at others panic when the ground shifts. My son looked stunned, then proud, then quietly ashamed of how easily he had underestimated me. I didn't blame him. I understood how invisibility works. Once you accept it, others follow. What struck me most wasn't their reaction, but my own. I felt no urge to gloat, no satisfaction in watching her struggle for words. I had imagined this moment 100 times during sleepless nights, always filled with anger and vindication. But when it arrived, those emotions were gone. In their place was calm acceptance. I didn't need their respect anymore, because I had already given it to myself. After that day, everything shifted. The tone in her voice softened, not out of kindness but caution. She chose her words carefully now, measuring them the way I once had. Offers of help appeared. Invitations. Apologies wrapped in politeness. Respect, at last, but it felt strangely hollow. Respect given out of fear of loss is very different from respect born of understanding. They began to treat me like someone important because they had to, not because they wanted to. And that difference mattered. I saw how quickly attitudes change when power dynamics reverse. The same people who once dismissed my opinions now asked for guidance. The same woman who had reduced me to usefulness now spoke of family unity and mutual respect. But something irreversible had happened inside me. I could see their change clearly, and because of that I could also see its limits. Their respect depended on my success, not my humanity. It appeared when I became valuable in their eyes, not when I was simply present. That realization freed me from the desire to return to what had been. I understood then that success doesn't just open doors, it reveals truth. It shows you who respected you only when you had something to offer, and who valued you even when you had nothing. And once you see that difference, you can never unsee it. The irony was quiet and sharp. Everything I had once begged for, acknowledgement, dignity, consideration, arrived only after I no longer needed it. And that was the moment I knew I had truly won. When they finally came to me with apologies, I had already crossed the point where those words could change anything. I could see the effort in them, the careful tone, the softened expressions, the rehearsed humility. It was clear they believed this was the final step, the moment where everything could be repaired if they just said the right things. They didn't understand that apologies have a season, and that season had long passed. My son spoke first. His voice carried regret, heavy and sincere. He talked about misunderstandings, about stress, about how life had gotten complicated, and people had said things they didn't mean. I listened without interrupting, not because I was desperate to hear him, but because I finally had the strength to let others speak without feeling erased. When he finished, he looked at me the way children do when they hope forgiveness will restore the world to something familiar. Then she spoke. Her apology was quieter, more fragile. She didn't look at me directly at first. She talked about respect, about family, about how she never intended to hurt me the way she did. She said she could see now how much I mattered. She said things would be different if I came back, if we started fresh, if I gave them another chance. As she spoke, I realized something important. Every apology was focused on the future they wanted, not the past they had damaged. They wanted relief from guilt. They wanted balance restored. They wanted me back in a role that made sense to them again, forgiven, present, and manageable. I didn't feel anger listening to them. I felt clarity. I understood then that revenge was never about making them suffer the way I had suffered. That idea had tempted me once, in darker moments. But as I stood there, calm and whole, I saw how small that kind of revenge really is. Causing pain doesn't heal humiliation. Watching someone regret their actions doesn't rebuild years of lost self-respect. What healed me was distance. What healed me was choosing myself when no one else did. What healed me was building a life so full and stable that their approval no longer held any value. I told them the truth, gently and without accusation. I said I believed they were sorry. I said I hoped they would treat others better than they had treated me. And then I said the words they weren't prepared to hear. I wasn't coming back. The room went silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't shock or disbelief. It was the realization that consequences had arrived quietly and couldn't be negotiated away. My son looked hurt, but he nodded. Somewhere inside he understood. She didn't cry this time. She simply looked tired, as if she had run out of ways to control the outcome. Walking away from that conversation felt nothing like defeat. It felt like relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying their expectations, their regrets, or their promises. I wasn't responsible for making their family feel complete. I wasn't responsible for easing their guilt. I was responsible only for myself, and that responsibility felt light. In the weeks that followed, I reflected on how far I had come. The man who once begged silently for respect would have accepted any apology just to feel seen. But the man I had become didn't need recognition to exist. I had learned the most important lesson too late to save the relationship, but early enough to save myself. Freedom, I realized, is the most misunderstood form of revenge. It doesn't shout. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't demand witnesses. It simply removes you from places where you were diminished and places you somewhere you can breathe. And once you taste that freedom, you protect it fiercely. I didn't hate them. I didn't wish them harm. I just refused to return to a version of myself that survived on tolerance instead of dignity. That refusal was my victory. That boundary was my justice. They thought the story ended with their apology. In truth, it ended much earlier, on the day I decided that my life was worth more than being endured. Everything after that was just confirmation. And that is the quiet truth people rarely talk about. The most powerful revenge isn't being remembered with regret. It's being remembered as the person who walked away, rebuilt, and never needed to look back.